Yes, let's see David Stewart talk about 10 reasons not to buy the Nintendo Switch 2. This will test the internet, so let's see if it drops out.
Hey folks.
Let me know if you can't
guys
hear
bought a
things.
book yet? You should buy this one, The Creative Process. You can find my books on Amazon. You can just look them up, or you can get a free book by joining my mailing list, dvspress.com/list, or buy them on Patreon, or join Patreon. You get a free rotating book every month.
He plugs himself.
There's a new console coming out. Evergreen statement, because you could watch it in 10 years. There's probably a new console coming out. I'm talking about the Switch 2. This is a console you should not buy, and I encourage everybody to boycott Nintendo and say no to the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm going to give you 10 reasons for this. I'm going to proceed to them in regular order 1 through 10, because otherwise it would imply some kind of hierarchy, and these aren't a hierarchy of reasons. These are just 10 good reasons why you shouldn't buy a Nintendo Switch 2. So, number 1, it's just a better Nintendo Switch, and chances are you already have a Nintendo Switch. So it's nothing new or exciting. It doesn't break any new ground. It doesn't perform any different functions. It's just a better Nintendo Switch.
But what about Nintendo's own version of Discord and voice chat and sharing your games with each other? And the Joy-Con 2s have the mouse control thing. So there is a bit of some nuance difference with that, I would say. That you could go, it is different. And I'm playing devil's advocate here, obviously. But, yeah, that point is a little bit flawed because there are some differences. Plus, the hardware in the Switch 2 is up to modern console standards more. It can play more modern games. If you only have one console and you want a handheld and one that can be docked to a TV, then, and you like the Switch, you could get the Switch 2 with the Switch games that you may already have, play them on the Switch 2, all that. But of course, yes, the majority of it will be very, very similar.
And chances are you have not run out of games to play on your Nintendo Switch. So you can just continue playing your Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch still has 150 million units sold, huge installed user base. Most games, especially if they're indie games, are probably still going to come out on the Nintendo Switch. So you're not really going to miss anything by going to the better version of the Nintendo Switch, right?
Until Nintendo FOMOs people and goes, we're shutting the Nintendo Switch shop down. Now we'll only be the Switch 2 shop.
Already experienced everything that the Nintendo Switch has to offer. You can just keep playing your Nintendo Switch. Number 2 is $80 or maybe even $90 games. It could even go higher.
This is a big one.
This is something that they debuted, that Mario Kart will cost $80 or $90 for a physical version of the game. This has a lot of people up in arms. Yes, games, if you're adjusting for inflation, were more expensive in the 90s, but we've gotten used to $60 games, and more importantly, are you getting $80 worth of value out of that game? Plus, you're probably still going to have to buy DLC on top of it, which increases the value, increases the cost of the game beyond its value. Are you really going to get that value? I think a lot of gamers are like, no, right? If you're,
I think a lot of people are seeing that. At least the games that they've said are going to be $80. They're saying it's case by case or whatever. You're not going to be going, oh look, we're going to get $80 worth more out of the game than a $60 game. This is US prices, of course. $80 is like $140 dues, which is like spending that on a game is a lot. I'm not dropping any frames. Thank you, Lord.
Releasing a game for $80, I do not feel confident that I'm going to get $80 worth of value out of this, and I'm willing to close my wallet in order to encourage more companies to not buy $80 to $90 games. The unfortunate thing, though, is I think that Nintendo, being a market leader and because it never puts its first party games on sale, has the potential to drive up the price of games for everyone in the entire industry, including on other platforms. Because if Nintendo can sell their games consistently for $80, that means Square Enix can as well. That means other companies can sell their games at an introductory price of $80 or even $90 for a physical version of the game.
Yep.
So that's a good reason to just say no to this entire generation and say no to the Nintendo Switch 2.
So it's possible that they may look... It'll be interesting if you actually vote with your wallet as far as the game prices and got the Switch 2 console just so you could play your Switch games better. And not buy any of the Nintendo Switch 2 games. And it'll be interesting to see their metrics go. People bought the console, but hang on, they haven't bought the games. What is with that? Because the console is, well, about the same price. A little bit less still, but about the same prices. PS5, Xbox, whichever the latest one is. And so it's like, okay, that's comparable. They're still, for a handheld, cheaper than the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, and I think MSI has one, MSI Claw or something. So for a handheld market, they're still cheaper. But they're also making things very demanding. And handhelds are getting less effective as far as battery power and the amount of time they can be played versus the amount of power they can put into games and things. Like if I'm thinking handheld, and most people probably play docked or whatever anyway, hardly anyone play handheld, maybe one person I think. And they would have a low battery life expectancy.
Number 3, it uses emulation for backward compatibility. This one I kind of expected because in past generations they've used iterations on previous versions of the hardware, like especially going from the GameCube to the Wii to the Wii U. It's like the same architecture, but they're not going to really have that for this one, is my understanding. So because it's an emulation layer, you're not going to get any of the benefits, right? It's not going to run at a higher frame rate. And they're locking all of that, by the way. So if you want to play Breath of the Wild, a Wii U game, with a higher frame rate, you have to pay for like an upgrade pack for that.
Which is also the Nintendo Switch edition of it, not the Wii U edition of it, probably. You do have to pay for the upgrade packs, yes.
Hey, $80 to $90 games, plus upgrade packs for old games that you already own, plus you have to pay for the tutorial software. It's insane. But the emulation layer for backwards compatibility means that you're...
Yeah, I didn't realise before that welcome tour they talked about in the Direct, you have to pay for that. I'm like, bruh, why?
Not going to be able to play all your Nintendo Switch games on it. It's really not going to be backwards compatible. So you have to keep your Nintendo Switch around anyway to play your old games. So you might as well just skip this one too, right? It's not going to be a selling point for a lot of people. I have to still keep my Nintendo Switch 2. I can't trade that in. I can't count on any kinds of backwards compatibility. I have to think ahead about what games I want to take with me because they may not run on my Switch 2. That's going to be an issue. Number 4, it's actually still the worst option for third-party games in the entire industry. And that's because third-party games, while they do come to the Nintendo Switch and developers are heavily incentivized to release things for the Nintendo Switch, and I believe this would be the case for the Nintendo Switch 2 if it gets a lot of wide adoption, they don't do it at the same time. They do it because there's a big installed user base. There's a lot of people there that you have the potential to sell a product to. It's kind of like there's Call of Duty for the Wii, but it's like...
This is David Stewart. We've heard him talk before. He plugs his stuff at the start and end of his videos. He talked about the Clone Wars Micro Series, which is the one I remember a bit more. He's giving reasons not to buy the Nintendo Switch 2.
Worst version of Call of Duty because the Wii was it was basically a GameCube. So it's like a GameCube port of a game that was originally written to run on the Xbox 360. So you can imagine how much worse in terms of fidelity it is and how much worse it's going to run. So yeah.
This is the argument people have against the Switch, right? Is that third-party games on the Switch aren't that great because the Switch has such low hardware. And that's the reason people would get the Switch 2, is because it has better hardware that can play more modern games. Now, some of the more modern ones, like Cyberpunk 2077, is still going to look worse because they're very demanding on hardware. But a lot of the lower tier ones and some bit older ones would definitely play it better on the Switch 2.
You managed to somehow get The Witcher 3 onto the Nintendo Switch, but is that the best way to play Witcher 3? No, it's actually the worst way to play Witcher 3 unless you're like trying to run it on some kind of ancient PC running running some old Radeon card from the early 2000s. That would be the worst option, but in terms of modern hardware, it's the worst option for playing something like Witcher 3. So for any third-party game, it's always going to be the worst option for fidelity, for timing, for compatibility, for performance, for everything.
Yep, exactly. Why in the world would you try to play Cyberpunk on the Switch? Well, it's there. They announced Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be able to be playable on the Switch too. It's hilarious.
Because you're always going to be looking at a port from a more capable system. So yes, Final Fantasy VII Remake is coming for the Nintendo Switch 2. This is a game that came out on the PS4. So we know that it could probably run on the on the Switch 2 because the PS4 is roughly going to have the same amount of power as a Nintendo Switch 2. So yeah, you're looking at that. However, we got that game in like 2020 or something, right? We got that game a long time ago. I remember I bought it during the pandemic. I had to have a guy come out, like, throw it in my window. I was like, yeah, man. It was like I was buying drugs or something. I rolled down the window, and the guy had a mask, and he's like, whoa, your name is this. I was like, that's my name. And he threw it onto my seat next to the Butterfinger that I bought. I had to buy Butterfinger because they use cloud to advertise Butterfinger. So yeah. So we've had that for a while. So if you had Sony hardware, you've been able to play this game for ages at this point.
I remember Final Fantasy VII Remake was one of the first games I streamed, right? And some dude was coming in, oh, you can't claim this, and I was like, because Australia got it a little bit earlier than other countries. I'm like, bruh. I think back on that now and go like, well, then they release another bloody version. But yeah, anyone that's interested enough in the game would have got it already. For a bunch of the games that they're announcing are going to be playable on the Switch too. So only someone that's only playing Nintendo would be like, oh, this new game, I'll get it on there. And I guess if someone wants it handheld, but really, with the battery and how demanding those newer games will be, why would you do that?
And that's going to be true for almost any other game. Now, Duskbloods is releasing for the Nintendo Switch too, but again, I've heard that that'll probably come to PC and other platforms. So generally, if you want...
It's likely, yes, because FromSoft will likely just go, here's exclusivity for a year or something, and then go to other platforms.
The best fidelity, it's still going to be gaming PC. And if you want the most timed exclusives, if you want to play games most often right when they come out, it's still going to be a PS5. And the Switch 2 is going to be the worst option if what you care about is the third-party games. If you don't care about the Nintendo games, it's definitely the worst option. And if you're somebody who's willing to do emulation, the Nintendo may not even be the best option for Nintendo games. Yeah, I'll just say that. So number 5 is game.
Yep, Nintendo might not even be the best for Nintendo games. What I find so weird is that they have in-house emulators, right? And then they still can't play all the games, whereas the other emulators have been able to go, we'll launch every single game that you want to boot up.
Key cards. Now, this was technically a thing in the Switch generation. The Nintendo may not even be the best option for Nintendo games.
We had to have that again.
That. So number 5 is game key cards. Now, this was
game
key
cards,
in the Switch generation, but it's a little more obvious in the Switch 2 generation. This is the game doesn't have any game data. You put the cartridge into the machine and it downloads the game.
It's so dumb.
There are discs that are like this on the PS4, PS5, and now we have it on the Nintendo Switch 2. So people who care about...
Wait, there's discs like this? There's discs like this? All the discs I have, as far as I know, contain the game. I mean, obviously there's generally always updates to it, but they do include the game on the disc. on the PlayStation 4. Right? He's definitely, obviously drawing a parallel to PlayStation. I haven't seen any game discs that don't actually contain the game. Even if they're spread across a couple of discs. Yawning, that's why I'm also like, okay, I'm gonna not stream too long. Yeah, and it's like, okay.
Their game card containing the actual game for future proofing, for future preservation.
Future presentation. And also, one of the main reasons I would get a console is I like the idea of going, I'll put this in the console and be able to play the game, rather than, I have to wait for it to download and install. Then, I don't have internet. Oh, I got this new game, I don't have internet, which could be a thing here, you never know, at one point. Because the internet has been a struggle here. But somehow, I'm still streaming with 0% dropped frames, somehow. I must have the settings correct, it's 720p, 2000 bit RAM, this time or not. It works. But, that's the thing too, like if you're going to take ages to download something, you shouldn't have to.
Nintendo Switch 2 is not going to have that. In fact, a lot of games are probably going to have big patches. They might have some of the game data on the card, but they'll download a bunch more to your system. The system storage is going to be that much more important because of that, I think. I think it's just a bad step for the preservation of games and the ability to use physical game media to its full potential. There's also...
Yeah, and also you have like the whole, here's a PlayStation 5 without a disc drive. I'm like, what the hell is the point of that? Why wouldn't I just get the games on the computer?
Also an issue that, the Nintendo Switch is a portable game system. It's a handheld. So having a physical game that doesn't have the game on it is a problem. Like, what if I'm in an airport and I want to play a new game I bought and I take it out and I plug it in and it's like, you need to connect to the internet to download this game. It's like, oh, okay.
Yep, he's giving a use case.
My system anymore and play it. On the Nintendo Switch, I was very used to being able to just put a game into a Nintendo Switch and play it. In fact, it was a thing like I've seen Nintendo Switch games on sale at the airport. You could buy them at the airport and put them in your Nintendo and play them at the airport without having to connect to the airport Wi-Fi. But that's not going to be the case going forward. If you just want to pick it up and go, now you have to plan ahead. You have to be in a place where you can get the Wi-Fi. You buy the Wi-Fi on the plane so that you can slowly download the game and play your Nintendo Switch 2 game. I just think it's going to be a bad thing going forward and kind of silly. Like, why would you buy that if you could just download it, right? Just buy it off the digital storefront. And yeah.
I was just thinking of something and now I'm brain farted. Oh, this is why I don't want to stream when I'm not prepared for it. And I'm like, oh, I'm tired as well.
Going forward and kind of silly. Like, why would you buy the Wi-Fi on the plane so that you can slowly download
it? What was he saying just before that?
You have to plan ahead. You have to be in a place where you can get the Wi-Fi. You buy the...
Yeah, all of that anyway. All that's great points to it. It's a big one, right? Yes, I remember what I was going to say. Another thing, because he brought up it being handheld primarily, it seems like Nintendo are going further and further away from handheld. Because you've got the Nintendo DS and the Nintendo 3DS are great consoles. But the thing is, I've noticed, is like it goes to the Nintendo Switch and the battery life just immediately is a lot less. So if you have a long road trip, you will need to charge your Switch in like 3 or 4 hours instead of it lasting 5 or 6 hours. I haven't tested it a huge amount, but I notice immediately when I'm playing a game a little bit handheld a bit or something on the Switch, the battery drops so much quicker, it seems like, compared to the DS or the Game Boy Advance, that kind of thing. As I feel like you get that issue where the Switch 2 is going even more towards his more hardware, and you can play these other games and do more, but also it's going to have less battery life most likely than the Switch, no, the first Switch. Unless they put in a bigger battery, which they haven't said anything about it that I've seen. It's one of those grey areas where it's like, I haven't actually seen anything about that. I wonder if I could look it up. Just quickly. I wonder if the internet will allow me to look this up. It does. 2 to 6.5 hours in handheld mode, according to the AI review. What's it gonna say? And it's a link. TLDR. Okay, here we go. 2 to 6.5 hours with a lithium-ion battery. So, yeah, for Nintendo Switch, it's 4.5 to 9 hours. Look, I seem to always get the low end of this when I'm playing handheld. So, or maybe I get the XA serial number one. I don't know. I would have to have a look at that. But it's got even less battery life than Switch 1. And that means if you want to use it handheld, you need a power bank. Just plug it in constantly, probably. But it's not going to be anywhere near as good as the old Switch, especially if you got one with the serial number that has a bigger battery in it. Oh, it says it's the OLED models that start with XT and they have 4.5 to 9 hours as well. Neat. But also, I look at that and go, if I want to use that handheld, I want so much more battery life out of it. It is so scummy. It's buried as much as they could. So, to be able to try and compete with modern consoles, they're just going away from all of handheld and trying to be... They sort of still have handheld, but then also they don't really want it to be handheld because you got hardly any battery life. The info is buried as much as they could, and it's like... The reality of it, they put higher grade hardware in, it's going to have less battery life. That's where it's like, the Steam Deck would be neat, right? The Steam Deck itself does have a battery life on it, but it is very varied. Where the heck are the options? Here we go. So the OLED ones have 3 to 12 hours of gameplay content dependent. So that's automatically going to be on something that's low hardware. You don't have Bluetooth turned on. You don't have internet turned on. Best use case, you get 12 hours out of it. That is more than the Switch 2. 3 hours is still more than the low end of the Switch 2. So as a handheld, if they're trying to compete with the Steam Deck, they're not doing that well. As far as when you're looking at a handheld, you want battery life to be as good as it can be. Because that's not a selling point, right? That's why they want to bury that.
There's a lot of downsides to like the little Switch cartridges. They're kind of easy to lose. Now, number 6, no OLED, no organic LED. So
I've never seen a big issue with OLED not being part of a console screen. Maybe it's because I've never played on a Switch OLED or a handheld console on OLED, but I don't see that as a big deal breaker. That's not really an issue for me. I feel like if they're offering an LCD version, they should be cheaper than the OLED version, which they'll probably bring it later because they brought out the Switch OLED. And it's trying to get more money because they got to have money.
we had an OLED for the revision of the second revision, I think, actually, because there was a little revision where they increased the battery life on the original Nintendo Switch. But the OLED Nintendo Switch, people are really used to that screen, better quality screen. Yes, the new screen is higher resolution, but it is not OLED, so it's going to be a step down in terms of the contrast ratio, those deep blacks that you get used to with the OLED. OLEDs just look better in almost every single way compared to even a good quality LCD.
Yes, OLEDs look better. But my handheld experience has been the Game Boy and Nintendo DS and 3DS. I don't think I'm going to call this a game breaker, because it's like, I was happy with the games with those screens. If I want to have OLED or a fancy screen, it will be plugged into a TV. Do OLEDs drain more battery than an LCD? See, we're all on this. LCD displays generally consume less power than OLEDs when displaying bright images or white backgrounds. That's an argument for LCDs. Playing devil's advocate, right there. But at the same time, they have a crappy battery in it. And they're not getting the battery life out of it that they should be by putting an LCD on it. And trying to put other power saving features on it for the handheld mode. So therefore, kind of defeats the purpose of the LCD screen. They might as well put an OLED on there.
But that is unfortunate. That's going to be an unfortunate step down. I think a lot of people, it won't matter that much, and they probably didn't ship it so that they can then sell a revision that has that. So later on, they can sell another Nintendo Switch 2 to the same person who bought a Nintendo Switch 2 at launch, so that they'll, they can have an OLED model. They can buy a second one. So you can sell potentially 2 consoles.
Yeah, that's a tactic, but also I got a Nintendo Switch and I still haven't bothered with the OLED or any of the future ones. It will be good for the battery life, but I'm like, it's not worth it. I'll just keep the same one.
People. I think that is a big upside. I also think that the OLED just does increase the cost a little bit, and Nintendo is wanting to ship the console. I think if they put an OLED in it might have been even more expensive. Who knows? But yeah, no OLED, which means even though it's a higher resolution, you're still losing a little bit of visual quality compared to what you have with the OLED Switch.
And also, I mean, I don't know if I'll bring this up, but higher resolution, will the layperson even notice anything on the size screen that it's got in handheld? Are you going to notice anything? I feel like handheld should be fine on 1080p, and you have a screen about the size of the Switch 1 works well. I mean, I already said about they don't need the bigger screen. But then you could dock it and then be able to have the extra GPU power in the dock and have 4K output to the TV, and that would work well.
And OLED Steam Deck and people playing on OLED TVs and things like that. So, number 7.
Also thinking of that too, right, is that I feel like you could just change the resolution of it down to 1080p, and you see if you notice, especially on the first party games, right? Nintendo games aren't known for their graphic fidelity. They're known for other things. So, would you even notice that?
It's $450.
Oh yeah,
$450.
$700 here.
A gigantic amount of money in today's money, but it's substantial, and there's still a lot of alternate utility that $450 can buy you. Just in terms of the gaming space, $450 will buy you 9 games at roughly full price, $50 a piece.
$50 a piece, yeah.
So if you buy PC
US
games,
dollars,
they're often $50, even when they're new. That's 9 games. So that's 9 whole games you could play on.
So if you even go, I'll just do this on my phone. If you go, it's $60. So 450 divided by 60, which is the AAA game stuff, is 7.5 games. If you're paying full price for all the games.
The Nintendo Switch, or you could play the Switch One, that is, or you could play on your PC or some other console that you might own instead of buying the Nintendo Switch 2. That's $450 that can be spent on all the other hardware for the other things. And the $450
Mm-hmm.
is the initial buy-in. You want to buy it with the Mario Kart game and don't want to pay $90 for Mario Kart, you're in for $500. If you want the camera so you
Yep.
can stream yourself or play games that use the camera, that's I don't remember how much that is, but an extra $50. You want to buy the Pro controller, of course you do, because Joy-Cons, even when they're improved, they're still going to be crap and not feel good on anyone that's has hands larger than a child. That's going to be an extra $70, $80 to buy yourself a Pro controller. Even the third-party Pro controllers are probably going to be more expensive this time around.
Yeah.
So it's not just $400.
The Pro controllers already cost a lot for the Switch.
$50 buy-in. By the time you buy all the crap, it's really more like a $600 buy-in, and that can buy a lot of other games for things that you already own, including the Nintendo Switch. So it's not like there's a big shortage of Nintendo Switch games to play. Chances are you have a giant back catalog, or if you're just looking for a new game to play and have fun with, it'll be out for the
That may
Nintendo
have
Switch.
frozen because I
There's probably a lot of
tabbed.
games you missed for the Nintendo Switch. I know that there are a lot of games that I missed for the Nintendo Switch, so chances are that's you as well. So $450 is a lot of ultimate utility, and certainly I can think of a lot.
I didn't think about all the accessories on top of it as well, because the Switch has a lot of accessories. Like, it comes with 2 controllers. If you want to play with more than 2 people, you need a 3rd or 4th controller at least. So that's extra cost for controllers for the new Joy-Cons, and they would cost more because they went, oh, magnets, and they tried to put more things to try and say these are better controllers, and they would put the price up. And then the charging dock. And then if you want a better normal gaming experience, you get the Pro controller, and it feels better in your hands, but it's like, well, this costs a fair bit. And then you're also going, the Switch 2 price would be an extra bit on top of that. We must return to Pong.
$450 right now that I would really like to have that aren't games, right? Like guitar equipment or something like that for $450 instead of games. But just in terms of games, there's a lot of alternate utility for $450, especially when you're just buying games. And for $450, you get nothing. You don't even get a tutorial game for $450. When you buy a $500, so if you're going to go in for $500,
I think so. Is that the one where you hit the ball up and it hits the squares and they disappear, and you keep sending it back and forth?
you could buy a PS5. It's going to look better.
Yeah,
it's going
that's
to have
what I thought it was. Yeah, of course I have.
Packing game, and you're going to buy a subscription service
Great
for the
game.
Nintendo Switch, so you can use the game chat feature. Well, you could buy the subscription service for the PlayStation and get free games with that.
I hate how scummy so many of the subscriptions are. Guess what? You can do this for free on a PC with Discord. You track the hours. Damn.
Whereas the Nintendo Switch service, you get free games, but they're like retro games, which if you're clever, you don't really have to pay for those anyway. If you're clever, I'm not advising that you do anything that wouldn't be strictly legal. But just keep that in mind. When it comes to playing retro games, come on, guys. It's 2025. You guys know how to use. You can use all the emulators you want on your phone. You don't need to buy the Nintendo Switch 2 to play GameCube games. You could buy a GameCube and the games for a lot less than Nintendo Switch, or you could use Dolphin emulator to run them. I play my GameCube games. This is why I like the GameCube. The GameCube part of the Nintendo Switch Online catalog doesn't interest me at all because I already have a GameCube. I have the games. I could play them in HD on my HD TV, actually, 4K TV, using a Wii U, which plays GameCube games. You just have to do a little work to it, So I could play my GameCube games on the Wii U, or I could play them on my GameCube, and I already have the games. And I have HD versions of a lot of them that are still on the Wii U and haven't ever been ported. Like the HD version of Wind Waker is really good, and I would recommend it if you have a Wii U. That's a great one to play. And I bought those for a lot less money, by the way, too, than what you would get from buying a Nintendo Switch 2. So $450 is still a lot of money, and chances are if you've already bought another console, you can buy a lot of games for that current console and just not worry about buying that next piece of portable hardware. Number 8, expensive storage media. So yes, they're changing to
Yeah.
a higher quality SD card, but it's not. My understanding is not backward compatible with cheaper micro SD cards, which is going to be a problem, right? You're just gonna have to.
Yeah, they're trying to guarantee a speed for the game, which I can see their argument for, right? You want your games to run a certain amount of FPS. So many people complain about that on the internet. They go, alright, then but get the better SD card. I wonder if the software would recognise a lower speed SD card though. That would be interesting to see if it just still worked. They just don't guarantee certain frame rates and whatever.
More to store your games, and especially since most of them are going to be digital now, they're not going to be on the game. You're going to have to buy extra storage for your Nintendo Switch because
that's the big one, right? Is that you're gonna have to get like a terabyte, or I think my Switch one's 512 gig. Because I'm like, there's some downloads and things of games that I've got that are like some are free games. One or two are like, I got the game in the shop, it was cheap, but then they go, oh, it's download only. Well, at least I don't pretend it has a card to it, but it's like, okay.
you're going to fill up the storage that's on there really, really, really quickly with any kind of modern game. You know how big games get these days, even if they're smaller on the Switch 2, because maybe they don't ship with like the 4K textures or something like that. They're still going to be really huge, so you're going to run out of storage really fast. You're going to have to pay the piper to get that expensive storage media. So that $450, it's going to go up and up and up. You're going to end up at $700 buy-in really quickly. Number 9, the hardware race is dead. I think a lot of consumers are simply not going to notice a big fidelity increase between the Switch 2 and the Switch, believe it or not. And I use this because
that's not why you're playing it. Also, it's like people they're showing side-by-sides of Breath of the Wild, Switch 2 edition, and the normal Switch edition, whatnot. It runs at a great frame rate anyway. It's a single-player game. You don't need 120 FPS on it. And then the graphics, I mean, honestly, some will look like they're actually better on the Switch 1. Let's have a look-see, though, on my actual computer, because I've only seen these on my phone. Let's see if I can just see images. Comparisons, here we go. Here's some. I should change what side I'm on, and copy this and input it into here so that we get a better experience. Okay, so we've got this one. Yeah, they upped the contrast a little bit. This is a bright area anyway. So how's the Korok Forest looking? All they look like they've done is up the contrast. Okay, there's a little bit more detail on the statues and whatever, but that really doesn't seem to matter to me. Like, you can still see what they were going for. You still get the vibe of the world and all that. Oh, this is Wii U versus the Switch 2. That'll be interesting to have a look at. I hadn't seen that. Well, really, especially if you're handheld playing Zelda or whatever, it's not gonna. It doesn't look like it's that much of a difference. Like, especially when you have to pay for it on top of already owning the game. Yeah, that is also not exactly the same spot, but like and it's also like a thing of, do you need better graphics on it? I don't think you do. It's nice to have better graphics, But do you need better graphics? Not necessarily.
I deal with normal people all the time who aren't gamers, who aren't used to picking out high quality textures and seeing the difference between 1080p and 4K resolution. And this was the case with the PS5. Is a lot of people were like, it just doesn't look better. It just doesn't really look that much better than the PS4. Now, to me, it looks a lot better, but for the average person, and I think the Nintendo Switch and the Switch 2 are really geared towards your casual gamers for the most part. There's nothing.
This is also a great example of like we've hit a technological plateau in a way, where graphics are good enough that the layperson is like, I don't see a difference. And a lot of the time it's like, well, if the layperson doesn't see a difference to a gamer, yes, you notice some details and that's cool and that, but it's still an older game that they're revamping anyway. What does it make a difference? You can literally play the game on the old Switch and you might even get better battery life if you play the Nintendo Switch version on the Switch too. Ooh, there we go, there's another handheld argument of like, you could play the lower quality version of the game and have a longer battery life, which I think has always been what Nintendo's been great at, is handhelds.
Wrong with being a casual gamer. There's nothing wrong with being a kid, but my kids really do not. Can't.
Yeah, exactly. And don't care about graphics. As a gamer, I'm playing older games. I'll go play Dark Forces. It's graphically very dated. The Dark Forces remaster did a lot to help with that, and that was great. But most of the joy out of the Dark Forces remaster was the controls being remastered and being better.
The difference between different levels of fidelity, not easily. They can tell if the polygons are really like, they can tell
imagination,
the PS1
indeed.
and a PS2 and a PS3 game because of the polygon count. But once you start getting past that, my son is just now starting to be like, well, that looks a lot better, but when he was little, he just didn't know the difference. So I think for most people, they're not going to see a huge difference between the Switch 2 and the Switch 1. So certainly not enough of a big graphical leap to justify buying a Switch 2 and buying the upgraded versions of the games in order to run them at a little bit higher frame rate. A lot of people don't.
A little bit high frame rate, and they had some more pause, whatever. That's like the comparison of Breath of the Wild, right? There would really make no difference to the game enjoyment of the game to have a few more pixels.
You could notice the frame rate. I've even had people in the comments tell me like, no, I don't like 60 frames per second. I like 30 frames per second. It looks 60 frames per second looks like cartoonish garbage or something. I'm like, what? But hey, there's people are out there, and a lot of casual gamers just don't notice frame rates that much unless they're really low. They're like, that's kind of choppy, but they just are not clued into the smoothness of gameplay the way a lot of enthusiast gamers are. So I think
I don't do call myself an enthusiast gamer, but I'm not so nitpicky about frame rates, because I play single player games. Maybe that's a difference too. Whereas multiplayer games is like, well, yeah, FPS can change how quickly you can see someone coming into the map or something. And for stuff like Breath of the Wild, it doesn't matter, it's a single player game. And it's to go with your preference, but why does it need to be so high FPS? I feel like people are too obsessed with that.
For the average player, the fact that the hardware race is dead, that we have not had the leap from the PS1 to the PS2 is huge, PS2 to PS3 was huge, PS3 to PS4 not that big, PS4 to PS5, some people can't even tell the difference, right? Casual people often have a difficulty telling the difference, just like how a lot of people can't tell what ray tracing is.
Filthy casuals.
So there's all this emphasis on ray tracing, and like your average casual person can't even tell whether it's on or not, and that's a problem for selling new hardware. However,
it's interesting with ray tracing, because you go to some older games, they do reflections in water, and they do all this, and it represents the same thing, and it looks arguably just as good as far as depicting the world that they're in. It's like things don't need ray tracing,
I think that makes it harder to justify buying a new iteration of the same thing, buying a Nintendo Switch 2 when the 1080p screen who's not going to make that big of a difference because it's so small, right? And I've gone over. I have a video on this too. That like the quarter HD screen of like a Vita is a 540p, but it doesn't matter because it's so small. Increasing the pixel density wouldn't.
This is what I was talking about earlier too. Yeah.
If that makes any sense, because the pixels are so close together.
People can't visually see the extra detail.
You're not going to get a whole lot of extra fidelity out of going to 1080p versus 720p and so forth. So I think a lot of people are just not going to notice a huge difference between the Switch 2 and the Switch 1. A lot of people can't pick up on HDR. They still don't have an HDR TV. I know a lot of family members and friends that they don't know what HDR is. They don't buy HDR TVs. They have no idea about how to hook that up. They don't.
Bloody HDR. Look, I'm telling you. I was just closing my microphone box because it seems like I'll keep it plugged in. Or at least on the desk here. Bloody HDR. Okay, I'm telling you. It was looking weird as all get out on my main computer at home. I turned that off. It looked like they tried to go, oh, it's filmic. It's flattened the image and made it look boring and took out a heap of contrast. And I'm like, no, I'm just turning that off. That looks worse. Why can't I just look at it normally? And I don't know if you can tweak settings in that. I never looked into that. I'm just like, it's in the middle of stream. I'm turning this crap off. HDR I don't see the point in it.
They don't notice. It's just not part of their thinking at all. They're not cued in to that level of fidelity, and in that case, is the Switch 2 really going to be a good buy? And that's really number 10. Do you need a Switch 2?
No.
There are so many other options for entertainment besides the Switch 2. For a long time, you can bet that most of the games that you'd want to play, are going to come out for the Switch 1 as well as the Switch 2.
Yeah,
because of the huge installed user base of the Switch 1. This is the same thing with the PS4.
They can sell more if they do that.
We had several years of games still coming out for the PS4, even the big mainline titles, because there was just a huge installed user base for the PS4. So are you going to miss out on a lot of opportunities for games? You'll miss out on some because Nintendo is going to only release some of their first-party games for the Switch 2, but a lot of third-party games are still going to come out for the original Nintendo Switch. And if you're talking indie games, they're definitely going to come out for the Nintendo Switch.
Indie games will also come out for PC.
As well as the Switch 2, because you don't want to miss out on that user base, especially if you don't have a graphically intensive game. If you have a game that can run on a potato, then you're going to produce a Switch version of that as well. And for me, I like indie games a lot. I think that's where all the variety of gaming really is these days, is in the independent sphere. You're going to find the really special games, kind of off the beaten path. And they're usually not as graphically intensive as the big boys who really care about, skin texture in the game and whatever else, right? It's more about the art style and the gameplay. And chances are you're still going to be able to play those on the Switch 1. So no, you don't really need a Switch 2. There's no shortage of entertainment. When I think about, do my kids really need to play the new Mario Kart game? No, they don't. They have many other video game entertainment options and a plethora of non-visual entertainment options for them to play, right? My kids will actually get bored of watching TV or playing video games if I just let them do it, and they will turn it off and go play with toys. And I have a lot of toys for them to play with too. And we have the great outdoors to go play in. We don't need a Nintendo Switch 2. It's not going to be a necessary thing. It's something that you could probably wait to buy or buy used if you are just thinking about the optionality of buying it later.
I mean, I feel like that just applies to all game consoles. Even buying games on PC, right? They're not a need, they're a want. Therefore, you can wait until it goes on sale or whatever later, if you want to get it. Or you can entertain yourself with other things.
So, anyway, that's it. Leave me your thoughts down below. Should you actually buy a Nintendo Switch? Or should you take my advice to heart?